He gunned down his wife's companion, while she watched, trembling. Hourglass not done open on a wind-blasted Texas plain. A low storm clouds roll in. Distant thunder rumbles. A solitary rider gallops toward a dusty Clinton saloon, spurs spitting grit. The year is 1868. Reconstruction has turned Texas into a powder keg. On one side stands the Taylor clan, proud, bitter, haunted by war. Opposing them is William "Bill" Sutton, a lawman armed with badge and vengeance. That night in the smoky lamplight of a saloon, a verbal dispute over a horse sale turned gunfire. Buck Taylor and his associate Dick Kisham died where they stood. The air tasted of gunpowder and brimstone, echoing with screams and the metallic tang of blood. That shooting was supposed to be lawful, a horse dispute only. Within hours, both families would redraft their definitions of justice. From this spark, the longest, bloodiest feud in Texas was born. Bill Sutton was supposedly a man of law, yet he may have crossed into outlaws' ground. Rising tension coils like a rattlesnake. The Taylors, led by Pitkin and Creed, vow vengeance. The Suttons, backed by Reconstruction authorities, claim they serve order. Each killing draws retaliation. Towns become battlegrounds. Allies are recruited. Fear seeps into homes and churches. At the climax of this section, Sutton's posse guns down Charlie Taylor in March 1868, the first formal blood spilled. The Taylors cry foul, calling it murder dressed in badge. The emotional peak, families shattered, alliances forged in grief. The lines are drawn in blood and distrust. Could a lawman be the first spark in a family war? Badge or bullet, which did he wear? In a foreshadowed echo, modern legacy dynasties locked in scandal, whether political or gang wars, still repeat the same pattern. A single betrayal sparks multi-generational war. Today's feuding power families trace roots to exactly these cycles. But one secret was still waiting. They rang a cowbell and shot an old man in his field. Hourglass not done evening wind ripples through tall grass on Pitkin Taylor's cornfield. A distant cowbell clangs eerie out of place. Pitkin, frail and gray, steps out into the moonlit rose. Suddenly a bullet tears through the air. He staggers, clutching his chest. The wind smells of wet earth and gunpowder, his breath raspy, heart hammering. This is the attack use deception, ringing a bell to lure him out. Pitkin Taylor, patriarch of the Taylor clan, had long claimed moral high ground. But that night he became prey. The wound would fester. 6 months later he died, victim not just of a bullet but of generations of rage. Before this moment, his sons had watched as Sutton's men escalated. In 1868, Sutton, in his role as deputy, had already killed a Taylor kinsman, Charlie Taylor, during an alleged horse theft arrest. Then on Christmas Eve, Sutton shot Buck Taylor and Dick Kisham in a saloon dispute over horse sales. That act lit the fuse. So by 1872, Pitkin's assassination was both revenge and strategic. Remove the father, transplant fear. Beyond the bullets, psychological pressure mounted. The Taylors' rage coalesced into a vengeful resolve. Pitkin's death transformed them. His son, Jim Creed Taylor, stepped forward, steeled by loss and driven by the belief encapsulated in the Taylor war cry. Who sheds a Taylor's blood, by a Taylor's hand must fall. Rising tension. Jim teases ambushes, trains allies, recruits notorious gunslingers. One of his dark allies was John Wesley Hardin, a man whose reputation for cold-blooded killing was legendary. Hardin's entrance tilted the game. He joined the Taylor side, bringing lethal muscle to family vengeance. Soon, Sutton sympathizers would be shot through saloon doors, ambushed on dusty trails, or gunned down in cold night. Hardin, an outlaw, became a family's wild card. At the climax of this section, the Taylors ambush a Sutton posse in Cuero on April 1, 1873. They fire through saloon doors, wound Sutton. The shot rings, glass shatters, crowd hides. The energy crackles like lightning. Emotional peak, generations broken, vengeance burning in every eye. The Taylors are no longer victims, they are aggressors, rising in feral power. When revenge becomes identity, who remains human? They shot through saloon's door. Meanwhile, in modern times, power dynasties embroiled in feuds, political houses, crime families, often turn personal betrayal into identity wars. The Taylor motto echoes in modern vendettas over business, prestige, or legacy. John Wesley Hardin walked into a Taylor wedding and left with a corpse. Hourglass not done evening lantern light flickers inside a barn dance near Gonzales County. The smell of whiskey, sweat, fresh hay, and horse manure mixes in the thick night air. Laughter and fiddle strings echo across rough floorboards. Into this scene strides John Wesley Hardin, pistol at his hip, eyes cold. He pauses, scanning the crowd. A shot rings and one guest crumples. Chaos erupts. This is Hardin joined the feud through bloodshed, not diplomacy. He was not born into the Sutton or Taylor ranks, but his violent reputation made him irresistible to a clan thirsting for force. Hardin's arrival turns the feud into something wilder, more unpredictable. Before Hardin's entry, the feud was local, Taylors versus Suttons, deputies versus ranchers. But by 1872, the conflict had escalated. Pitkin Taylor had been shot in his field. Sutton's men had assassinated the Kellys, Taylor in-laws, under flimsy charges, and state police under Captain Jack Helm had sided with Sutton. The violence was spiraling. The enforcement arm of government rebranded itself as Sutton's militia. When Hardin allied with the Taylors, he tiptoed between outlaw and family avenger. In April 1873, Hardin allegedly participated in the ambush that wounded Sutton in a Cuero saloon, bullets slicing through doors, glasses shattering, Sutton bleeding on the floor. In July, he and Jim Taylor cornered Sheriff Helm in a blacksmith shop. Helm, unarmed, was gunned down. Hardin held townsfolk at bay while Taylor delivered the final volley. The tension ratchets. Towns that once tolerated both sides are forced to choose. Families switch allegiances. The sound of hoofbeats at midnight, the tearing down of fences at dawn. The boundary between peace and ambush dissolves. The feud becomes a land war not just of blood, but of territory, reputation, and legend. At the climax, Hardin, following Taylor's lead, kills Helm in brutal fashion. Citizens hear the shotgun blast, the blacksmith's forge glows as bodies fall. The emotional peak, one killer slain, vengeance realized, but worse storms brewing. The Taylors believe their victory is justice. The Sutton faction seethes with rage. Can a hired gun become blood-bound to a family? He joined them in killing. In modern times, we see militias, mercenaries, or privatized hit squads recruited by powerful families or dynasties. The same logic. Bring in force. Legitimized by blood. The Hardin model repeats in secret wars and shadow networks today. But one secret was still waiting. They shot him on a steamboat gangplank in front of his wife. Hourglass not done morning fog curls off Indianola Harbor. The steamer Clinton swings at the dock, its wood deck slick with dew and salt. William E. Sutton and his friend Gabriel Slaughter step onto the gangplank, wives trembling beside them. Suddenly, rifles crack. Sutton staggers. Slaughter falls. The women scream. The tang of salt spray mixes with iron blood. This is Sutton was leaving the feud. Assassins found him anyway. He had intended to escape the bloodshed, yet the Taylors tracked him down to the docks. Days earlier, Sutton had attempted to withdraw from DeWitt County, but blood does not untangle easily. The killing was carried out under the guise of departure, betrayal disguised as final mission. Before this moment, Sutton had gradually lost control. Reuben Brown emerged as an influential marshal of the Sutton faction. He later would be shot dead too. But in a single blow on March 11, 1874, Jim Creed Taylor and his brother Billy Taylor boarded that steamer and murdered Sutton and Slaughter. The blow shook the entire feud. One side had struck the head. Tension pulses like a drawn bowstring. The Sutton faction responds with terror. They mobilize, lynch 3 Taylor men, Cute Tuggle, Scrap Taylor, and Jim White in Clinton, June 1874. Then Reuben Brown, Marshal of Cuero and rising Sutton figure, is gunned down in a Cuero saloon in November 1875. Storms brew, literal and figurative. In September 1875, Indianola is hit by a catastrophic hurricane. The jail flooded. Cowboys and prisoners alike escaped. The cyclone drowned sections of the port. Hundreds died. A natural disaster aided escape. Chaos became weapon. At the climax, amidst rising bodies, betrayal, and storms, the legend of the feud begins its final slide. The emotional peak. The Taylors had struck the heart of the Sutton side. Revenge became rain. The Suttons, once lawmen, now look like hunted men. When your target boards a ship, does justice ever wait? He died on a gangplank. In modern politics and crime dynasties, leaders fleeing power often get assassinated in transit, on runways, in exile, on border crossings. The feud's logic echoes. You can't escape legacy. They hung 3 men from courthouse windows at midnight. Hourglass not done in the silent night of Clinton, Texas. A wind moans through empty streets. The courthouse stands dim, windows dark. Unseen hands drag ropes. 3 men shackled are brought up to the second-story frames. A faint scrape, a muffled sob. Then creaking wood, bodies jerk, limbs twist. The smell of sweat, fear, and rope dust hangs heavy. The moon glints on nooses. This is the Sutton faction answered rage with public terror. Not a hidden ambush, but a spectacle of death. These weren't battle casualties. They were lynchings, a message painted in horror. Innocent, convicted, or accused, all were treated the same under vengeance. Earlier that year, tension had boiled over. After the Taylor strike against Sutton on the steamboat in March 1874, the Sutton side struck back. On June 20, 1874, in Clinton, they lynched Rufus Scrap Taylor, Cute Tuggle, and Jim White, 3 men associated with the Taylor faction. Locals said the night air was too quiet before the ropes broke. Then the feud spread into courts and mob rule. The rule of law collapsed. The emotional weight is crushing. To the Taylors, these men were martyrs. To the Suttons, vengeance had become theater. The lines between outlaw and judge are erased. Tension ratchets. Accusations swirl. Allies on both sides plot in shadows. Jim Taylor's wrath turns more ruthless. Sutton's supporters swear blind retribution. The feud morphs, no longer only about territory or past slights, but about demonstrating dominance through horror. At the climax, the bodies swing in the courthouse windows, terror floods the county. The shock radiates, one side forced to respond in kind or risk submission. The emotional peak. Revenge becomes culture, fear the coin of power. When murder becomes public theater, who protects justice? They hung them from windows. In modern times, we see political hit squads, extrajudicial executions, and public displays used to terrorize rival factions. In cartel wars, regime purges, gangland feuds. The same psychology. Kill in the open, intimidate all. The courthouse lynchings echo in modern shows of power over courts and institutions. Rangers stormed Cuero. The feud met its judge that night. Hourglass not done, midnight air crackles with tension as the Texas Rangers' hoofbeats echo down the dusty streets of Cuero. Lanterns flicker, doors bolt. Inside homes, trembling citizens hear distant rattling, the approaching march of law. The scent of fresh rain on dry earth mingles with the iron tinge of fear. The feud, once locked in private vendettas and ambushes, now faces a new force, the Texas Rangers. This is not just vengeance. This is a war judged by the state. Governor and local powers conclude that only a neutral third party can break the cycle. The Rangers must side with neither Taylor nor Sutton, but they may end up judged themselves. Previously, both sides had operated with near impunity. The Taylors recruited killers. The Suttons operated through law and mob. Blood had been spilled across salons, fields, docks, and courthouses. In 1875, Reuben "Rube" Brown emerged as the Suttons' marshal in Cuero, a forceful agent in their campaign. But Brown, too, fell under fire. In November 1875, Brown was shot dead in the Exchange Saloon by Taylors or their allies. After Brown's death, the Sutton side faltered in leadership. The Rangers would not wait any longer. Captain Leander H. McNelly and his Ranger Battalion arrived in DeWitt County in August 1874 to quell the violence. Though plagued by illness later, his presence forced both sides to pause. By late 1876, Captain Jesse Lee Hall replaced McNelly and led a decisive push into Cuero. The Rangers encircled indicted suspects at a log house during a wedding party. They disarmed 70 men with minimal bloodshed. The climax of this section. Under Hall's command, the law finally enters the feud's domain. The Rangers force surrender, arrest suspects, and re-establish order. The emotional peak. The feud's chaos collides with a new order and the walls tremble. Can the sword of law truly cleave through centuries of vengeance? Rangers broke the blood feud. In modern times, dynasties locked in power struggles are often forced to yield to federal or global institutions, courts, human rights groups, inspectors. The same tension when family war meets state power. But one secret was still waiting. Jim Taylor fell in a Clinton alley, shot by his own countrymen. Hourglass not done, the early dawn mist clings to narrow streets of Clinton. The smell of damp wood and cold dew lingers. Footsteps echo in alleys. Jim Creed Taylor, clutching a cloak, moves silently toward a safe house. A shot cracks sharp, echoing. He stumbles, blood blossoming on his shirt. The taste of copper floods his mouth. He sinks against a brick wall. Rain begins to patter overhead. This is Jim Taylor, died not in grand battle, but betrayal in darkness. His death signals more than an end. It marks the turning point in the feud's fate. The king of vengeance fell to the shadows, not in open war. Before this moment, Jim Taylor had dominated the feud's narrative. Avenging his father, orchestrating attacks, aligning with Hardin, he was the heart and terror of the Taylor side. But by late 1875, the Suttons were shattered. Their leader Reuben Brown had been killed in a saloon by Hardin or Taylor allies. Public outrage over continued killings was rising. The Rangers and state forces had begun intervening more forcefully. Feud exhaustion was spreading across DeWitt County. On December 27, 1875, Jim Taylor, along with two companions, was killed in a gunfight in Clinton. The circumstances remain murky. Some say he was ambushed. Others say he was betrayed by his own allies. His death sent shockwaves. The man who had become the iron fist of the Taylor clan was gone. Without him, cohesion cracked. Tension stretches taut. The Taylors splinter. Loyalties fray. Some men withdraw, others lash out in desperate rage. The law steps deeper into the void. The audience senses that the endgame is near. At the climax, Jim breathes shallowly, his hand drifting to his revolver, but darkness claims him. The emotional peak, the fear, loyalty, vengeance, all collapse into one body on cold bricks. The feud's myth begins to unravel without its fiercest voice. When the king falls, who writes the final chapter? Vengeance died in alley shadow. In modern times, dynasties often collapse not by external force but internal betrayal, boardroom palace coups, organized crime families, political clans. The same pattern, the strong man dies alone. A hurricane busted open the jail. Taylor walked free at midnight. Hourglass not done, the sea wind howls like a banshee on Indianola's battered docks. Rain lashes wooden beams. Water crashes against piers. The jail's windows shudder and bars creak. In the darkness, a cell door groans open. Floors flood, prisoners slip, chains rattle. Under cover of storm chaos, Billy Taylor slips free into the deluge. The taste of salt spray, the sting of cold rain, the groan of timbers collapsing, all conspire in that wild midnight escape. This is nature itself became an accomplice to vengeance. The hurricane that battered the coast didn't just destroy buildings, it freed a prime fugitive. The storm that spared many also served the feud's darker design. Earlier, Billy had been jailed at Indianola, awaiting trial for his role in the murder of William E. Sutton and Gabriel Slaughter. Turn Zero Search 3, the public and authorities clamored for justice. On September 15, 1875, a catastrophic hurricane struck Indianola, ripping roofs, sinking vessels, flooding streets. The jail filled. Officials, fearing mass drownings, released prisoners. Many vanished in the storm's chaos. Billy disappeared too. Turn Zero Search 3. His escape was wild, opportunistic, criminal genius meets natural disaster. Tension surges. The Sutton side seethed, the law lost its chance. The Taylors gained momentum. Rumors swirl. Did someone bribe guards? Did someone plant the storm's timing? Or was it simply fate? Meanwhile, Texas Rangers already working the case close in. The public demands resolution, condemns lawless immunity. At the climax, as dawn breaks, citizens in Indianola see wreckage, bodies drowned. But no Billy Taylor. The emotional peak, the feud's power shifts, the hunted become ghosts. The law's image falters. Justice slips like water through fingers. When nature frees a fugitive, who holds power? Storm freed him at midnight. In modern times, disasters, natural or engineered, have been used to cover escapes, power grabs, or regime transitions. From prison breaks during earthquakes to political coups amid riots, the pattern persists. Chaos is weaponized. The legacy of the feud echoes in these dark strategies of power. But one secret was still waiting. Masked riders dragged a doctor from bed, then shot his son. Hourglass not done, a moonless night blankets the DeWitt County backroads. Crickets chirp, cicadas hum, wind stirs old oaks. At the Brassell farmhouse, candle flames flicker inside as Dr. Philip Brassell and his son George sleep. A soft knock, then broken window glass. Figures in hoods burst in, rifles flashing. In the dark hallway, a child's cry, the smell of gun smoke, the thud of boots on wood. Phil is dragged into the yard. George emerges, terrified. Shots ring. Bodies crumple. The killers vanish into the night. This is the feud targeted a peaceful civilian family. Not a Taylor, not a Sutton, a respected doctor. The murder was a message, terror beyond clan lines. Before this atrocity, most killings had remained within the feud's margins. Ambushes, saloon fights, public lynchings. But by September 1876, tensions had flared into open massacre. The murder of Dr. Brassell and his son outraged the county. This crime brought in new players, the judiciary, the public, and the full force of Texas Rangers under Captain Jesse Lee Hall. The county is shaken. Citizens once afraid to take sides now demand justice. Judges fear assassination. Witnesses vanish. The feud spills out of the border of DeWitt into the legal system. The entire community is drawn in. Hall arrives in October 1876, determined to end the bloodshed. He meets with Judge Henry Clay Pleasance, whose courage becomes central. Pleasance has already requested Rangers to guard the courtroom. Threats surround him like vultures. Tension surges. Armed men stake out courtrooms. Inside, law books lie poised between bullets. The ranchers' once hidden killers now must stand trial or die trying. The feud has become public war. The climax of this section. Hall's Rangers stage a bold raid at a log house party in a rural celebration with indicted men inside. Hall enters alone, unarmed, calls out names. He orders women and children out, then his Rangers sweep in, disarm 70 men. The emotional peak. Law meets legacy. The ruthless face the judge's gavel. When clans defy courts, who enforces the law? They murdered a doctor in his home. In modern times, we see how vendettas hit innocents, whistleblowers, judges, journalists, to silence entire institutions. The Brassell massacre echoes in stories of power silencing justice today. A judge pointed a shotgun, then jailed 60 feuders at once. Hourglass not done, the courtroom door slams shut. The scent of sweat, dust, and stale oak presses on the air. Judge Henry Clay Pleasance, face grim, lifts a heavy shotgun off a rack. Men in ragged coats and gun belts freeze mid-motion. The click of the weapon being cocked echoes. Outside, Texas Rangers stand ready. The gallery gasps. This is the judge became enforcer, not just adjudicator. A trial turned into a siege, with law perched on the edge of a barrel. Earlier, violence had escalated too far. The murder of Dr. Brassell and his son in September 1876 triggered deep outrage. Judge Pleasance, long threatened and warned, persuaded governor's office to send additional Rangers under Lieutenant Red Hall to protect court proceedings. The indictments against 8 men shook the feud's core, but the courtroom risked turning into a shootout zone. Pleasance knew he needed leverage. As trial day arrives, busloads of indicted men are brought in, nearly 60 captured by Ranger detachments. Townsmen, jurors, and witnesses fill the court. Tension rings like steel. Pleasance calls the court to order. Outside, Hall flanks the building. Inside, guns rest behind curtains. The judge's shotgun is more symbol than weapon, but its presence channels control. At the climax, with 2 of the accused still resisting arrest, Pleasance gestures to Hall, the weapon in his hand, asserting law's dominance over vengeance. He orders the courtroom cleared of threats. The accused must stand or face immediate Ranger intervention. The emotional peak. Law holds its ground in a room built for blood. The legend of the feud collides with the gavel. Can order rise when vengeance's ghosts crowd the courtroom? 60 feuders, 1 judge's stand. In modern times, we see how judges, prosecutors, or anti-corruption agencies step onto battlefields, literal or metaphorical, to contain dynasties waging vendettas. The Pleasance moment mirrors modern standoffs, when justice must show force to survive. But one secret was still waiting. Only one man was ever convicted, then pardoned. Hourglass not done morning sunlight spills across the dusty courthouse yard of DeWitt County. Heat shimmers off the wooden steps. The scent of sweat and leather hangs heavy. A lone prisoner is marched forward. Shackles clink. The courtroom hushes. All eyes on the accused. He trembles. The judge's gavel echoes. The verdict trembles between life and death. This is after years of carnage. Only one man would ever be held legally accountable. And even that judgment would be reversed, pardoned by higher power. By late 1876, after the brutal Brassell murders and the public pressure they sparked, 8 men were indicted in Judge Pleasant's court under orders of Texas Rangers led by Captain Jesse Lee Hall. The community demanded that someone finally pay, but witness intimidation, fear, and legal manipulation had hardened the walls around justice. Over the next decades, these trials stretched on, appeals filed, juries balked, evidence disappearing. TSHA notes, a series of legal maneuvers lasting over 20 years resulted in only one conviction, and that person was eventually pardoned. Tension tightens. The accused stand before juries, lawyers spar, threats swirl. The courtroom is no sanctuary. Outside, guns may fire, reputations be ruined, families watch. Pleasance, Hall, and allies grip their resolve. The accused man breathes harshly even as legal machinery slows time. At the climax, the jury finds him guilty, the only man in the whole feud to be convicted. The emotional peak. After a decade of murders, the scales of law tip ever so faintly toward justice. But in the next hour, the governor issues a pardon. The sentence is swept away, the only conviction wiped clean. The blood debt remains unpaid. If no one pays for the blood, does justice ever speak? Guilty, then pardoned overnight. In modern times, we see elite dynasties evade prosecutions, powerful figures pardoned, trials stalled. The Sutton-Taylor saga's lone conviction and pardon echoes modern scandals where accountability is neutered by power. The feud bled into business, Taylor land seized by force. Hourglass not done in the dawn's gray light, dust drifts over open pasture lands in DeWitt County. Cattle low, wind stirring dry grass. Men move silently across fence lines, cutting barbed wire, driving away herds. The smell of scorched earth, sweat, and tension fills the air. Families watch from porches, hearts thudding. The feud is no longer just about blood, now it's about territory, property, and power. This is the feud shifted from bodies to balance sheets. Taylor holdings were expropriated, cattle stolen, land rights exploited in feud's name. After Jim Taylor's death, the Taylor faction fractured. The Sutton side, strengthened by connections with local authorities and lawmen, began pressing advantage. Some Sutton allies laid claim to Taylor ranchland. Others rustled cattle under the guise of settling debts. The feud's casualties now included economic destruction, farms ruined, tenants evicted, land titles disputed. The violence had hollowed out the Taylor family's backbone. Many survivors were impoverished, outmanned, hunted. The feud's shadow lengthened into every facet of life. Neighbors refused to lease land to Taylors, banks withheld credit, merchants demanded Sutton guarantees. Tension whispers in every county seat. The economic war intensifies. At the climax, a group of Sutton allies forcibly seize a Taylor ranch in the dead of night, driving off cattle, burning barns. Neighbors see the dust and smoke. The Taylors arrive at dawn, gates broken, livestock gone. Their land, their wealth, their dignity turn to ruin. The emotional peak. The Taylors lose not just lives but legacy. This is vengeance writ in empty fields. When war becomes takeover, who owns justice? Cattle gone, barns charred. In modern times, we see similar tactics. Feuding families, dynasties, or criminal organizations use economic warfare, asset seizure, hostile takeovers, corporate raids to finish off rivals. The wounds of the Sutton-Taylor feud echo in modern battles over real estate, business, and leverage. They signed a truce, then buried its terms in blood. Hourglass not done, late dusk settles over the dusty town square of Clinton. The air is thick still, dogs bark in alleys. Lantern glow pools around courthouse pillars. A group of men, weary and wary, approach each other under the fading light. The scent of sweat, gun oil, and dust lingers heavy. Pledges are made, fists shake. But in the hush before dark, someone slips behind a column, raises a gun, and bang, betrayal resounds. "This is peace" was used as camouflage for fresh carnage. The truce was negotiated only to give breathing room, not to end war. Earlier, as 1873 wore into 1874, both factions were exhausted, losses mounted. Public pressure and Ranger interventions forced them to consider a ceasefire. A symbolic treaty was signed in Clinton. Dozens of men pledged not to kill for the moment, but suspicion ran too deep. Each side read hidden threats in every handshake. Turn 0, search 1. The truce didn't even survive its dusk. Within weeks, gunfire shattered it. The Taylor side, led by Jim Taylor and allied with Hardin, struck again, ambushes, raids, retaliatory murders. The Sutton side responded with lynchings and public terror. The peace died before it could live. Tension intensifies. At night, men patrol roads. Townspeople barricade doors. Mercy is a myth. Families bury the dead, clean blood from porches, and brace for the next dawn. The feud becomes ritual, a relentless circle of violence and false reprieve. At the climax, a nighttime ambush breaks the truce. Bullets burst through windows, horses scream, men fall. The emotional peak, trust is shredded, no covenant holds. The once hopeful treaty was just another battlefield. Can a truce forged with vengeance ever last? Truce died in gunfire. In modern dynastic conflicts, in politics, business, crime families, ceasefires or peace deals are sometimes used to regroup, not reconcile. The same pattern, pacts used as pause buttons, not endpoints. The Sutton-Taylor truce collapse echoes in betrayals reneged by powerful players today. He pointed to the sky and called on God to end the blood. Hourglass not done, dawn's first light cuts through dusty courtroom windows. The hush is heavy. Judge Pleasant stands at the bench, robe still dusted from the night's vigil. Thunder rumbles far off. He lifts his head, voice steady, calling out, "May his justice fall where vengeance fails." The words hang in the stale air, acoustic in every wooden beam. Outside, wind stirs papers, and in the streets men pause, guns half raised, listening. This is the judge, invoked divine judgment over human bullets. A courtroom sermon became a courtroom stand. Up to this point, Judge Pleasance had wielded gun and gavel to hold both sides in line. The murder of Dr. Brassell, the public outrage, the Rangers' sweep, the trials all led here. Facing an audience of embittered feuders, fearful townsfolk, and ranger escorts, he knew his moment was symbolic. He had to not only rule but inspire law itself as a higher power. Before this, law in DeWitt County had often cowered beneath vengeance. Judges intimidated, jurors disappeared, trials delayed. The very act of putting 8 men under indictments for murder was revolutionary. The courtroom had become a battlefield. The Brassell case was the flashpoint. After the murder, Pleasant secured extra ranger backing under Lt. Red Hall, ensuring court could proceed without massacre. Tension crackles. Guns rest concealed under coats. Witnesses tremble. The weight of all past betrayals pulls on the room. Pleasance pauses, then lays out the indictment evidence, the threats he had received, and the moral imperative. Nobody is above justice. He refuses to bow to threats. He orders the accused to stand and face community judgment. At the climax, Pleasant slams his gavel, declares bail's denied, demands trial proceed. The emotional peak, the courtroom, once a stage for terror, becomes the arena for moral reckoning. A judge becomes the last bulwark. No hoods, no ambush, law must be seen to stand. When the law invokes God, can vengeance lose its grip? In modern times, we see judges, truth commissions, or anti-corruption bodies invoking morality or faith to break cycles of violence, from post-conflict tribunals to dynastic power struggles. The courtroom sermon in DeWitt County echoes in modern crackdowns where legal authority must reassert itself over family vendettas. He sat with a shotgun hidden. Judge Pleasance threatened them all. Hourglass not done near dusk. The courthouse yard in Clinton is quiet except for the soft creak of a swing gate. A breeze stirs the dust. Cicadas hum in the oaks. Judge Henry Clay Pleasance walks along the perimeter, shotgun slung across his back. Men inside glance nervously at windows. Outside, hidden among shadows, a man climbs a live oak. Pleasance halts, turns, levels his weapon. The snap of safety off echoes louder than any gunshot. Those in hiding freeze. This is the judge became his own bodyguard, law enforced by threat. A judge holding a shotgun to protect justice from vengeance. Previously, Pleasance had depended on the Texas Rangers and legal protections. But threats were mounting. Suspects in the Brassell murders, powerful Sutton allies, and death whispers followed courts and juries. He saw that the law might die unless he personally defended it. TSHA credits him as the key force in ending the feud. Earlier in 1876, after the murders of Dr. Brassell and his son, 8 men were indicted. But most witnesses vanished under threats, and local law enforcement was insufficient. Pleasance called repeatedly for Ranger support under Captain Jesse Lee Hall. He held court with the shotgun across his lap, daring factions to test the law. Tension hovers. In the courtroom, accused men glower. Outside, shadows shift. Someone coughs. Pleasance moves slowly, gun in hand, eyes sharp. He has dared any would-be assassin to show themselves. The message is clear. Law will not cower. The feud's guns may pause or aim at the judge. At the climax, a would-be gunman dropping from a tree fails to fire as Pleasance catches him in the beam of a lantern. The would-be assassin stops, trembling. The courthouse doors slam open. Pleasance strides inside, shotgun visible, ordering calm, seizing control. The emotional peak. The judge becomes the barrier between chaos and justice. He claims his courtroom as sacred ground. When the judge becomes the sentinel, who judges the judge? Judge held shotgun, not cowardice. In modern times, we see judges or officials under threat who must physically protect themselves. Armored vehicles, bodyguards, sealed courtrooms. The battle between law and violence remains real. Pleasant's last stand prefigures how modern legal systems guard against vendetta. But one secret was still waiting. The feud returned after supposed peace, blood spilled anew. Hourglass not done midnight fog cloaks the county roads. The whisper of wind rustles dead leaves. Somewhere ahead a horse whinnies. In a farmhouse window a candle flickers. Suddenly, shots crack, rifles fire through the glass. Panic shouts, running feet. The smell of burned gunpowder stings lungs. The night feels electric as though vengeance refuses to sleep. This is the feud reignited, even after long lulls of peace. Those believing it was over were fatally mistaken. After Jim Taylor's death in 1875, many assumed the feud had ended. Some violence ceased, some families sank into mourning, but peace held only until 1876. The murder of Dr. Philip Brassell and his son George on September 19, 1876, shattered the calm. Masked men dragged them from home and executed them coldly. That killing ignited public outrage and forced renewed Ranger intervention. As 1876 wore on, Captain Jesse Lee Hall led a Ranger force into Cuero to reassert law in DeWitt County. 8 men were indicted for the Brassell murders. But legal obstacles loomed. Witnesses were threatened, courts defied, and loyalty to vengeance ran deeper than loyalty to law. Only one man would ever be convicted, and he would be pardoned later. Tension spirals upward again. The county is split, neighbors spying, rumors in every shadow. The skis press low, storms threaten. In courtrooms, men glance over shoulders. Outside, guns await. The legal machinery begins turning once more. The feud is no relic, it is insurgent. At the climax, the courtroom doors open, Rangers escorting prisoners. The accused tower before judge, jurors, townsfolk. The verdict hangs heavy. A hush, then the gavel falls, one is convicted. But the emotional peak is fleeting. That conviction will be nullified by a pardon. The feud's final blow is legal, not violent. The blood debt, unpaid, grows permanent. When war flows into courts, can any verdict ever satisfy? Feud awaken from uneasy sleep. In modern times, we see insurgent conflicts revive after truce, old hatreds reignited by a single kill, a betrayal. Dynastic violence, civil wars, gang feuds, many resume even after formal peace. The Sutton-Taylor feuds return after hope ended exactly that dark cycle. Peace was declared, but no one dared to breathe. The year is 1877. The smell of gunpowder has faded from the air, but fear lingers like smoke that refuses to rise. The Rangers are still stationed across DeWitt County, and the silence in Cuero feels almost unnatural, like a predator hiding in the grass. Locals whisper that the feud is finally done. Yet, every creak of a door, every hoofbeat at night makes people flinch. They've seen what peace means here. It's just the pause between funerals. Many of the Taylor faction have scattered. Some fled to Mexico. Others hid deep in the brush country, watching the law from afar. And for the first time in years, the courts dared to hold public trials. Witnesses trembled as they spoke. They knew the price of truth was often death. Captain Jesse Lee Hall's Rangers stood guard at every courthouse door. Inside, the last threads of vengeance were being tested by law. One by one, indictments fell apart. Jurors were bribed, evidence disappeared, and men who had once been feared killers now sat calm and silent, untouched by justice. Still, the county could not heal. The children of the slain grew up with stories of betrayal. Graves on opposite sides of the same hill marked the cost of pride. Men who had once shared whiskey around the same fire now refused to speak each other's names. By 1878, the feud had burned itself out, not because peace triumphed, but because there was almost no one left to fight. The Taylors were broken, the Suttons diminished, and Texas itself had changed. Railroads replaced horseback trails. Towns grew where battlegrounds once stood. But one truth haunted everyone. No one had won. The feud had swallowed its founders, its soldiers, and its innocents alike. As the last ranger patrol rode out of Cairo, the townspeople watched in silence. The wind picked up dust from the road, the same road where so many had fallen. And in that dust, the story of the Sutton-Taylor feud finally settled. Was it justice or exhaustion that ended the killing? When the dead outnumbered the living, only silence remained. Because even after the guns went silent, one secret about the feud's final survivor was still waiting to be told. One man lived long enough to remember every grave he helped dig. His name was James Taylor, one of the last living men tied to the feud. By the 1880s, he walked with a limp and carried more ghosts than memories. The Texas sun had bleached his hair to gray, and the echo of gunfire still haunted his dreams. In every town he passed through, people whispered his name. Some saw him as a monster who'd buried too many good men. Others saw him as the last witness to a time when honor meant blood. When questioned in his later years, Taylor said little, only this: "We thought we were fighting for our name, but all we did was bury it." That line became the eulogy for the feud itself. By 1890, the Sutton-Taylor feud had faded into legend. The counties once drenched in vengeance were now quiet fields and cattle roads. The next generation grew up not knowing the smell of black powder or the sound of a shotgun echoing through the hills. But under that calm, history had already written its verdict. The feud hadn't been about justice, it was about pride. And pride, once wounded, doesn't bleed, it poisons. For nearly 2 decades, the Suttons and Taylors had tried to prove they were stronger, braver, more righteous than the other. Yet both sides ended the same way, hollowed, broken, and forgotten by the world they claimed to defend. At sunset, the camera lingers on a lonely graveyard in DeWitt County. No statues, no markers of victory. Just stones weathered smooth by time, and the wind whispering through dead grass. A wooden cross tilts in the dirt, faded carving reads, "Unknown, 1874." One of hundreds, a reminder that vengeance never builds a legacy, it only erases it. The Sutton-Taylor feud didn't end because peace triumphed. It ended because men finally saw the cost of their own reflection. Every feud, every rivalry, every war leaves behind the same question: was it worth it? Time buries blood, but it never buries guilt. Thunder rolls in the distance, as if the land itself still remembers. He returned to Cairo after decades to face ghosts. Years later, in the early 1880s, Billy Taylor quietly slipped back into DeWitt County. His face lined, his gait weary. He moved like a shadow among the graves. The wind rattled door hinges. The scent of dry brush and old blood lingered. Townsfolk paused in doorways. A Taylor walking among them again was a provocation and a memory. This is the once feared fugitive returned as silent reckoner. A ghost came back to walk among living judges. Earlier, Billy had escaped jail during the September 1875 hurricane at Indianola, bars bent. Water flooded corridors, prisoners freed, and Taylor vanished into the storm. He remained a fugitive for years, drifting across Texas or hiding in backcountry pockets, always watching, always waiting. Some reports claim he was tried twice later and acquitted. His later years remain murky, but legend says he died far from DeWitt, possibly in Oklahoma circa 1895. By returning, he provoked tension in a town that had tried to forget. His name reopened wounds. Families once torn by feud saw standing bodies in the marketplace. Whispers revived. The courts reopened cases. Witnesses trembled again. Tension stirred like dust in the wind. At the climax, Billy appears at the courthouse steps on trial day, not indicted himself, but a living reminder of all that bloodshed. He stands silently in the crowd, specter among accusers. Eyes flicker between past killers, judges, and new generations. The emotional peak. The revenge war may be over, but its ghost distribution remains. If the war's guns are silent, can memories still kill? He walked home among graves. In modern times, we see exiled or disgraced leaders return to reclaim power, stir old alliances, or provoke reckoning. The ghosts of past conflict never fully rest. The return of Billy echoes modern patterns. Scandals resurrect, wars restart, legacies haunt. When Billy Taylor came home, even the church bells refused to ring. He arrived just before dawn, hat low, coat frayed, spurs clinking softly on the dirt street of Cairo, Texas. The morning smelled of rain and rust, the kind that clings to old blood and memory. People watched from behind curtains as the last surviving Taylor walked through the town his family once ruled in terror. To some, he was a ghost returned to claim justice. To others, he was unfinished business in human form. For years, Billy had carried the weight of every bullet fired, every man buried under the feud's name. His brothers were dead, the Suttons gone or fled, and the Texas Rangers who once hunted him had turned into old men telling stories by firelight. But Billy wasn't here for nostalgia. He came to find the preacher who betrayed the Taylors, the man who'd secretly given Ranger Jack Helm their hideout location years before. Helm was long dead, but his informant still breathed, a quiet old man now running a feed store. The air was thick that evening when Billy walked in. The man looked up, saw that unmistakable Taylor stare, and froze. Billy didn't draw his gun, not yet. He only whispered, "You remember Helena?" The room fell silent. The rain tapped the tin roof like a heartbeat. Instead of killing him, Billy placed a small silver cross on the counter, the same cross his mother had made him swear upon before the feud began. He turned and walked out, leaving vengeance behind like a curse finally broken. Was that mercy or surrender? That moment marked the quiet death of the feud, not with gunfire but with restraint. Billy's final act wasn't revenge, it was renunciation. Yet in that silence, the townsfolk saw something deeper. Even when violence ends, its echo never leaves. Days later, Billy vanished again. Some said he joined a traveling show under another name. Others whispered he was shot in the desert, buried by strangers. No grave ever confirmed it. Ghosts fear forgiveness more than bullets. Today, that lesson echoes through modern dynasties, from political families to tech empires, where pride still drives ruin and forgiveness remains the rarest power. A single ledger could prove the Sutton-Taylor feud wasn't about revenge, it was about money. Years after Billy Taylor vanished, a dusty trunk was discovered in the attic of an abandoned courthouse in Goliad County, Texas. Inside it, amid yellowed papers and blood-stained warrants, lay a small black ledger bound in cracked leather. The handwriting was faded, but one line was still clear. Payments to Helm, Sutton claims, Taylor debts, 1872. It was the kind of discovery that could destroy legends. The ledger suggested the feud had been financed, not fueled by honor. Hidden behind the chaos was a powerful cattle syndicate using both families as pawns to secure control of disputed grazing land. In other words, the Sutton-Taylor feud wasn't a family war, it was a business war. The sensory detail hits here. The smell of aged parchment and mildew filled the air as the historian turned each page. Outside, a Texas thunderstorm rattled the windows, as if the land itself resisted the truth being uncovered. It listed payments made to Ranger Captain Jack Helm and other officials. Names long thought righteous now stood beside figures that screamed corruption. Some were marked settled, others silenced. A few entries had initials matching local judges and merchants, men who had built reputations as peacekeepers during the feud. They hadn't stopped the killings. They had profited from them. The discovery never reached the press. The historian who found the ledger died mysteriously in a barn fire 2 months later. The ledger disappeared from the county archives soon after. Was the feud truly over, or was it buried to protect the powerful? The idea spread quietly through Texas that the feud was less about vengeance, more about control of cattle routes, salt mines, and power in the Reconstruction-era South. The parallels are chilling. Today, modern dynasties wage quieter wars in boardrooms, courts, and media headlines, while the truth burns unseen beneath paper and lies. Rumor has it the ledger still exists, in private hands, protected by a family who knows what its pages could expose. And if it's ever found, Texas history may have to be rewritten. 2 months after finding the ledger, the man who held it burned alive in his own barn. His name was Elias Monroe, a local historian from Cuero, quiet, polite, and obsessed with the old feud. For years, he'd collected stories, photos, and letters from both Sutton and Taylor descendants. But when he stumbled on that black ledger inside the Goliad courthouse attic, he realized he wasn't just chronicling history. He was holding evidence. The fire began at midnight. Neighbors said they heard the crackle of flames and the roar of something unnatural, like oil catching fire. By the time they reached the barn, everything was ash. Elias' body was found near the doorway, one hand clutching a melted key. The ledger was gone. Investigators ruled it an accident caused by a lantern. But those who knew Elias swore he didn't use lanterns in the barn. He used a kerosene lamp bolted to the wall. Someone wanted this story buried. Days before his death, Elias had mailed 3 letters, one to a journalist in Austin, one to a university archivist, and one to a friend of the Taylors. All 3 envelopes arrived empty, seals intact but no paper inside. The whispers began again, not of feud but of cover-up. Rain fell heavy on Cuero the night after his funeral. A stranger was seen standing near the charred ruins, tall hat, long coat, silver ring on his right hand. Some said he was a descendant of the Suttons. Others claimed he was a retired ranger. Either way, he left behind only one thing: a burned corner of leather, stamped faintly with 1872. The town librarian later found Elias' final notebook, pages singed but readable. In it, one line repeated over and over: "They didn't end the feud, they moved it." Moved it where? Into politics, into banks, or into our own families? Today, modern corruption follows the same blueprint: hide your crimes behind justice, make the killers into heroes, and rewrite the ledger until only your name shines clean. Truth burns faster than oil. In 1974, a new rumor spread: a Taylor descendant claimed to possess the missing pages Elias once mentioned. He vanished 2 weeks later. The feud wasn't dead, it had evolved. In 1974, a Taylor descendant claimed to have proof the feud never ended. 2 weeks later, he vanished. His name was Samuel Taylor, great-grandson of one of the original gunmen. A mechanic by trade, quiet by nature, and the kind of man who never looked anyone in the eye too long. One summer evening, at a diner in Yorktown, Texas, he made a statement that would revive a century-old nightmare. "The pages survived the fire, I've seen them." He told two friends he was preparing to take them to a historian in Austin, but he never made it there. His truck was found 3 days later, doors open, engine running, headlights cutting through the brush on a dirt road outside Helena, the same ghost town where Jack Helm was lynched a century earlier. The seat beside him held a blood-stained envelope. Inside, a single word written in charcoal: silenced. When police searched his home, they found old cassette tapes labeled 1872, Elias, and Ledger. But every single one was blank. Not erased, blank. Neighbors claimed Samuel had received strange visitors at night, men in dark suits driving unmarked black cars. One described them as out of place, like city snakes in cowboy boots. It wasn't long before rumors spread. Maybe the feud hadn't just survived through families. Maybe it had evolved into something bigger. A journalist from San Antonio received an anonymous package days after Samuel's disappearance. Inside were photocopies of ledger pages listing new entries, not from 1872, but from 1973. Names included oil company executives, law enforcement officials, and two Texas politicians. The handwriting was identical to the original ledger. The storm that night smelled of diesel and fear. Thunder rolled over the plains as if the land was warning anyone who dared dig further. Can a feud that began with bullets end with boardrooms? The psychological rot that once fueled the Sutton-Taylor War, greed, pride, secrecy, had found a new costume: business suits. And just like their ancestors, these modern heirs learned that truth is the one debt you can't pay off. The feud never died, it evolved. In 1991, a cold case detective reopened Samuel's file. The report was sealed within 48 hours by federal request. And for the first time, Washington's name appeared in the feud. When Washington got involved, the feud stopped being Texas history. It became a cover-up. In 1991, Detective Harold Pike of the Texas Department of Public Safety reopened the Samuel Taylor disappearance case. He was a meticulous veteran of cold cases, known for following paper trails others missed. Within weeks, he found what locals had whispered about for decades: a direct link between the missing ledger pages and a network of oil land acquisitions stretching back to 1872. But here, where things turned surreal. Pike received an anonymous call from a Washington number. The voice on the line said only one thing: "Stop digging. The names you're about to find still sign laws." Days later, Pike's files were seized under federal jurisdiction. His office was reassigned, his badge revoked, and every document stamped classified. He didn't stop. From a motel outside San Antonio, Pike began contacting descendants of both clans. One, a Sutton heir-turned-energy lobbyist, admitted over the phone that the feud's original land grants were still disputed, some of the richest oil tracts in South Texas. Federal archives revealed that in 1969, a company named Helm Industries LLC had purchased multiple properties once owned by the Taylor family. The same Helm, as in Jack Helm, the Ranger captain executed in 1873. A century later, his name was still buying land soaked in blood. The pattern was undeniable. Old family names on new contracts, campaign donations matching land deals, and a single signature recurring since the 1970s, J.S. Helm III. That's when Pike realized the feud hadn't vanished. It had gone corporate. The night he prepared to go public, rain hammered the motel roof. The neon vacancy sign flickered red across his window. A car idled outside for almost an hour. Pike phoned a reporter friend and said, "If I disappear, tell them the feud isn't over, it's in D.C." He was found missing the next morning, his room ransacked. The only thing left, a scorched cassette tape labeled Ledger Redux. How far can one family's revenge reach when power protects itself? Today, political dynasties and oil empires still trace roots to those same counties. The feud that began over cattle and pride now hides behind corporations and committees. Texas blood runs through Washington veins. But somewhere in a Texas vault, that tape still waits to be heard. They came at dawn, 50 gunmen, hired by millionaires to kill the poor. The Wyoming plains lay silent that morning, blanketed in frost. But beneath that stillness, hatred smoldered. The cattle barons of the West, men of immense power, had grown tired of the small people fencing their land. They called them thieves, rustlers, and squatters, but what they truly feared was rebellion. This wasn't a war over cattle. It was class warfare disguised as justice. The settlers of Johnson County had carved homes out of the wilderness. Families lived by candlelight, working frozen soil just to survive. But when whispers spread that barons were losing profit, they responded with violence. They assembled an army, 50 hired killers from Texas, armed, mounted, and ready to purge the land. At sunrise, the first shots thundered. Smoke rose from homesteads. The air reeked of gunpowder and burning wood. A child's scream was swallowed by the wind. How far will the powerful go when they start losing control? The barons' kill list had 70 names, every man who dared to speak. But the settlers refused to bow. They fought back with rifles, pitchforks, and rage. For 2 days, the countryside became a killing field, where justice depended on who owned the most bullets. Then came the cavalry. The U.S. Army surrounded the invaders, and yet the barons faced no punishment. Their influence stretched all the way to Washington. The rich walked free. The poor buried their dead. The truth was buried, but the memory of that injustice never died. Even today, the echoes of the Johnson County War whisper through modern headlines. When corporations crush the powerless, when wealth rewrites the law, when truth becomes negotiable. The plains fell silent once more, but the wind still carried the faint sound of hooves and vengeance. They weren't soldiers. They were neighbors killing each other for 10 straight years. The Arizona sun beat mercilessly on the dry red soil of Pleasant Valley, but there was nothing pleasant about it. 2 families, the Grahams and the Tewksburys, once shared the same land, the same sky, and the same dreams, until greed, cattle, and pride tore them apart. It began with whispers, missing livestock, stolen horses, and accusations that turned friendship into fury. The feud didn't start in a courtroom. It started over a dead cow. One morning, a Graham Ranch hand was found shot in the chest. The killer was never caught, but both families knew who was responsible. From that day, forgiveness died in Pleasant Valley. Gunfire replaced words. By dusk, the valley echoed with the sound of vengeance. The smell of smoke and blood clung to the wind. When revenge becomes a tradition, can anyone escape the curse? Soon, even women and children were trapped in the crossfire. The feud spiraled beyond control, each death fueling the next. The Arizona wilderness became a graveyard of pride, where every echo of a rifle was another name erased from history. Both families forgot why the war began, but refused to end it. Lawmen came and went, either bribed or buried. By 1892, only a handful of survivors remained, haunted, hollow, and broken. They didn't win. They simply outlived everyone else. Some say the ghosts of Pleasant Valley still ride at dusk, waiting for the feud to end. Today it stands as a grim reflection of modern family feuds, when greed, ego, or inheritance turn kin into enemies. The weapons have changed, but the pride remains the same. In the fading light, the last survivor whispered a curse to the desert wind. May no man rest until this blood is repaid. A feud that outlasted forgiveness itself. But one secret was still waiting. One bullet in a Texas saloon turned neighbors into assassins. It began in the dusty little town of Columbus, Texas. A single argument between Sheriff Sam Reese and Deputy Will Townsend, two men sworn to uphold the law, became the spark that would ignite nearly a decade of bloodshed. At first it was pride, then it became vengeance. And soon it became war. The night was hot and heavy, with the smell of whiskey and gunpowder. When the first shot rang out inside the saloon, glass shattered like thunder. Reese fell, blood blooming through his shirt. His deputy Townsend fled into the shadows. Lawmen became outlaws, and justice died in the same breath. Reese's kin swore revenge. They hunted Townsend's allies through cornfields and churchyards. Every corner of the town became a trap. Within weeks, Columbus was divided, every family forced to choose a side. When justice turns personal, who decides who the villain is? The feud spilled across counties. Ambushes at midnight. Bodies found in creeks. Gunfire echoing through the plains. The feud had no honor, only desperation. Even the Texas Rangers couldn't stop it, because they were part of it. Some Rangers were kin to Reese, others to Townsend, so the badge meant nothing. The bullets came from both sides, and every funeral felt like a warning. By 1907, both families were nearly destroyed. The survivors carried scars not just on their skin, but in their souls, generations cursed by a single moment of pride. The feud ended not with peace, but exhaustion. Too many graves, too much hate. The town forgot what started it, they only remembered how it ended. Today you can still find descendants of both families in Texas living quietly, pretending the blood never happened. But in the silence of old saloons, where bullet holes still mark the walls, the air feels heavy, as if the ghosts never left. And yet, some say, one of the last letters written by Townsend himself was never found. A confession that could change everything. Two friends rode into town as brothers, and left as enemies buried in blood. The Oklahoma frontier was young then, raw, untamed, and violent. Among its settlers were Jim McFarland and Will Brooks, once the closest of allies. Together, they built ranches, shared suppers, and fought the same outlaws. But when greed and jealousy seeped into their bond, friendship turned into fury. It started small, a dispute over cattle and fences. But pride doesn't need much to catch fire. By the time dawn broke over the prairie, the Brooks and McFarlands were preparing for war. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about legacy. Gunmen began to arrive from nearby towns. Camps were set up along the hills. The smell of horses and dust filled the air, mingling with tension so thick it felt alive. Shots were fired in the streets of Stonewall, bullets whistling past church bells and general stores. The first to die was a McFarland cousin, ambushed on his way home. His blood soaked the dirt road, a warning that no one was safe anymore. What happens when revenge becomes a family tradition? For 6 long years, the feud consumed Pontotoc County. Brothers turned killers, sons buried fathers. The law tried and failed to stop the storm. Because deep down, everyone had chosen a side. Yet, the final shootout didn't happen in a battlefield. It happened in a courtroom. In 1902, during a murder trial in Ada, both families came face to face once more. Before the judge could speak, pistols were drawn. The sound of gunfire tore through the courthouse. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay scattered across the marble floor, justice drowned in blood. The feud ended that day not by peace, but by extinction. The last surviving Brooks and McFarlands walked away hollow, carrying a curse that would echo for generations. Even now in Oklahoma's quiet towns, locals whisper of the courthouse ghosts, shadows that never left, bound by vengeance. And in today's world, where family empires crumble over money and betrayal, the Brooks, McFarland feud still mirrors the same disease: pride over reason, blood over truth. They say one letter, found years later in an old sheriff's desk, revealed something no one expected. The feud was never about cattle, it was about love. The Civil War had ended, but in Texas, the killing had just begun. In the rolling pine hills of East Texas, the smoke of war hadn't yet cleared. Union men and Confederate loyalists lived side by side, bitter, broken, and waiting for an excuse to bleed again. That excuse came in the form of Bob Lee and Lewis Peacock. One a proud Confederate captain, the other a Union scout turned local hero. Once neighbors, now enemies. The feud began when Peacock accused Lee's men of murdering freedmen and stealing cattle. Lee struck back, branding Peacock a traitor and calling his home a nest of snakes. And soon revenge replaced peace. This wasn't a feud. It was the Civil War reborn on one county's soil. The air reeked of smoke and fear. Men rode through the night wearing masks, torches in hand. Cabins burned. Children hid beneath floorboards as bullets ripped through the walls. By dawn, 10 were dead. By the next month, twice that number. How do you rebuild peace when your neighbors remember every grave? The countryside turned into a war zone. Lee's supporters ambushed Peacock's men near Pilot Grove, the sound of gunfire rolling like thunder through the hills. Bodies were left hanging from trees, warnings to the living. Justice vanished because every sheriff, every judge had already chosen a side. By 1871, the feud reached its breaking point. Bob Lee was ambushed and killed on the road, shot down by the very men he once led. But his death didn't end the war, it only gave it purpose. The Lee men hunted Peacock's followers one by one, until blood was the only law left. Louis Peacock was finally gunned down at his own doorstep, ending the feud, but not the hate. The war was over again, yet peace never came. Because hatred, once passed from father to son, never truly dies, it only changes names. And in today's world, the Lee-Peacock feud still echoes in political rivalries, community divides, and nations split in half over old wounds. When the smoke cleared, someone found a burned letter in Peacock's cabin. It bore Lee's handwriting and three haunting words. It never ended. It began with one gunshot in a saloon and ended with a town soaked in blood. The year was 1873. The town, Lampasas, Texas, a sunburnt settlement where tempers ran hotter than the desert wind. Two families, the Horrells and the Higgins, had shared the same dirt, the same church, and the same whiskey for years, until one drunken night shattered it all. A deputy was killed during a bar fight. The Horrell brothers were blamed. The law tried to intervene, but the Horrells didn't answer to badges. They answered only to blood. The killers fled to New Mexico and started a war that followed them home. The Horrells rode west, leaving bodies behind in Lincoln County. They returned to Texas hardened, wild, and unrepentant, ready to finish what they started. The Higgins family, led by the iron-willed John Higgins, decided to end the chaos themselves. They formed a vigilante posse, swearing an oath to hunt down every Horrell who dared show his face. When justice fails, does vengeance become holy? Soon, Lampasas turned into a war zone. Windows shuttered, horses stampeded through empty streets. The sound of rifles cracked through the morning fog like thunder from hell. Women prayed behind locked doors, while men dug graves before the fighting even began. Even the Texas Rangers couldn't stop them, because they were helping them. The Rangers sided with the Higgins clan, determined to wipe out the Horrells once and for all. For months, the feud raged like wildfire. By 1877, 4 Horrell brothers were dead, ambushed, cornered, or gunned down where they stood. The last Horrell died smiling, whispering, "It's not over yet." And in some ways, he was right. The Horrell-Higgins feud never truly ended. It simply went quiet. Families moved away, names changed, but the hatred remained buried beneath the Texas soil. Even now, the descendants of both clans walk the same streets, their ancestors, ghosts etched in every creak of the old saloon floorboards. And in modern times, when lawmen turn vigilante and vengeance wears a badge, the story repeats, only the names change. Years later, an old Ranger journal surfaced inside, a single sentence written in faded ink. The law didn't win, the blood did. A sheriff's bullet turned Florida's swamps into a hunting ground for revenge. The year was 1870. The Civil War had ended, but peace never reached the marshlands of Florida. Two men, Sheriff David Meisel and Moses Barber, had once shared the same table, the same prayers, the same code of honor. Until justice came with a price. Meisel, enforcing new post-war taxes, seized Barber's cattle for unpaid debts. To Barber, it wasn't law, it was humiliation. To Meisel, it was duty. And duty would cost him his life. On a fog-soaked February morning, Sheriff Meisel rode into an ambush and never came home. His horse returned alone, saddle soaked with blood. The swamps fell silent, but the air was thick with the scent of death and decay. The Meisel family swore vengeance. They formed a posse, rifles in hand, to hunt the barbers down through cypress and shadow. When justice turns into vengeance, who becomes the criminal? For years, the feud tore through Orange and Brevard counties. Swamp by swamp, home by home, the killings spread, men shot in ambush, cabins set ablaze, graves dug in secret. No law dared intervene, because in those days the law had already chosen sides. The feud ended only when both families ran out of sons to bury. By 1875, nearly 24 men were dead. The survivors carried on with haunted eyes and a silence that would last for generations. But even silence couldn't erase the blood that bound them. Decades later, their descendants gathered for a truce on the very spot where the sheriff was killed. They prayed together, laid wreaths, and let the swamp swallow their pain. Yet even now, some say that when the fog drifts low over the water, you can still hear the echo of gunfire, the ghosts of a feud that refused to rest. And in modern Florida, where corruption and power still clash behind closed doors, the barber-Mizel feud remains a warning. When justice is personal, it always ends in blood. When historians revisited the case, they uncovered one final detail. The man who fired the first shot wasn't a barber or a Mizel. They rode under fake names, preached about justice, then slaughtered entire families in the dead of night. Mickeja and Wiley Harp, cousins bound by blood and brutality, were America's first known serial killers. In the lawless 1790s, when the frontier was still untamed, the Harp brothers turned the backroads of Kentucky and Tennessee into rivers of terror. They didn't kill for money. They killed for pleasure. Travelers, settlers, even infants, no one was safe. Their victims were found mutilated, their faces unrecognizable. Soon, bounties were placed on their heads. A manhunt began, hundreds chasing two shadows across the wilderness. Mickeja was eventually hunted down, decapitated, and his head placed on a pike as a warning. But Wiley escaped, and legend says he returned under a new name, living among the very people he once terrorized. To this day, the Harp brothers remain a symbol of how evil can hide beneath the face of kinship, and how the frontier's darkness birthed monsters that even time could not erase. They looked like an ordinary frontier family, polite, quiet, hardworking settlers. But behind their small inn on the desolate Kansas prairie, the Benders hid a killing ground that would haunt America forever. In the early 1870s, weary travelers often stopped at the Bender Inn for a warm meal and rest. None of them ever left. Beneath the dining table was a trapdoor, and below it a cellar soaked in blood. As guests sat with their backs to a curtain, Kate Bender, the daughter, distracted them with charm while her father crept up behind with a hammer. One strike, one scream, then silence. When neighbors grew suspicious, a search of the property revealed horror beyond imagination. Decomposing bodies buried in shallow graves, their skulls crushed. The Benders had vanished, leaving behind their bloody tools and a legacy of fear. Some say they escaped west. Others believe the townsfolk caught them and delivered their own brand of justice. No one truly knows, but the prairie winds of Kansas still whisper their name, the Bloody Benders. He promised to kill anyone not playing jazz that night. The year was 1918, and the streets of New Orleans pulsed with fear. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of rain-soaked wood. Somewhere in the distance, a jazz trumpet wailed, not out of joy but pure terror, because everyone in the city knew if the music stopped, the Axeman would come. He didn't break in for money. He didn't steal. He came only for blood. The killer would slip into homes through locked doors, wielding the victim's own axe, and vanish before dawn, leaving behind the sound of dripping blood and a half-empty bed. When newspapers published his letter, the world froze. He claimed he wasn't human. He called himself a demon from the hottest hell. His words slithered off the page like smoke. I am very fond of jazz, and I swear by all devils, every person shall be spared whose house has a band playing. That night the entire city trembled to the rhythm of survival. Every bar, every parlor, every broken soul played jazz. The melody wasn't music, it was a prayer. The police had suspects: a deranged Italian grocer, a jealous husband, even corrupt officers. But the deeper they dug, the stranger it got. The murders weren't random, they were rituals. Every scene matched the same eerie pattern. The door carved open with a chisel, the axe left behind, and a note: "Tell them the axeman was here." Was he a man? Or was he something darker that the city itself had birthed, a punishment for its sins? People whispered that the axeman wasn't gone, that he simply changed his mask. Because even now, over a century later, serial killers still taunt police with letters. The Zodiac, BTK, and others followed his ghost, using the same twisted game of fear and fame. The devil walked Bourbon Street that night. The Axeman vanished in 1919. No arrest, no face, no grave. Just silence and the echo of trumpets. But one secret was still waiting. In the archives of New Orleans police, one blood-stained record remains, a name scratched out in haste. Some say it belonged to a man who never existed. Others say he's still listening for the jazz. They said the curse began with one bullet, but it didn't end until the town burned. The year was 1876, in the dust-choked plains of Texas, where justice came not from lawmen, but from loaded guns. The Sutton-Taylor Feud had already claimed dozens of lives, but what happened in the summer of '76 would turn it into the bloodiest family war in American history. The air was thick with gunpowder and sweat. Horses screamed in the distance. Every creak of a floorboard could mean death. The Taylor clan, led by the cold and cunning Creed Taylor, were determined to wipe out the Suttons, once and for all. On the other side, William "Bill" Sutton and his men prepared for revenge, haunted by the ghosts of their fallen kin. When the Texas Rangers entered the feud to restore order, they didn't stop the violence, they joined it. The lines between lawmen and outlaws blurred until no one could tell who was the hunter and who was the hunted. In a storm of bullets near Clinton, Texas, the feud exploded. Families fled their homes, women buried rifles beneath church floors, and children were forced to swear allegiance before they could even write their names. The sound of thunder rolled over the plains, or maybe it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of vengeance echoing across generations. After Sutton's murder, the Taylors believed they had finally silenced their enemies. But within weeks their homes burned, their cattle were slaughtered, and their allies vanished. Rumors spread that a Sutton survivor had returned, a man with no name, no mercy, and one goal: to end the Taylors' bloodline. Was this revenge, or a curse the families brought upon themselves? Because even decades later, the Sutton and Taylor descendants kept dying mysteriously: fires, shootouts, disappearances. Some called it coincidence. Others whispered that the feud had become something darker, a blood debt that time refused to erase. The Sutton-Taylor feud remains one of the most violent in U.S. history, more deadly than the Hatfields and McCoys. And yet, buried beneath the official reports are missing pages, censored names of rangers and politicians who profited from the chaos. The feud the law couldn't stop. But one secret was still waiting. Hidden in an old Texas courthouse lies a blood-stained letter, signed by a ranger whose name history tried to erase. And what it says could prove the feud never truly ended. A century later, they opened the vault and the blood feud screamed back to life. The year was 1982, when a renovation crew in Clinton, Texas, stumbled upon a rusted iron strongbox hidden beneath the courthouse floor. Inside were letters, ranger reports, and one chilling note signed only C.T. Creed Taylor, the man who was supposed to be dead for over 100 years. The parchment was soaked in something dark, almost black, dried blood, ink. No one could tell, but what it revealed shattered everything Texans thought they knew about the Sutton-Taylor feud. The feud hadn't just been about revenge. It was a cover-up. Those family wars hid the murders of political rivals, land theft, and corruption involving early Texas Rangers and Confederate remnants who wanted to keep their grip on power after the Civil War. The Suttons were pawns. The Taylors were executioners. The Rangers, the puppeteers. As investigators read the letters aloud, the courthouse lights flickered. Locals swore they felt a chill crawl down their necks. The storm outside cracked open the night, as if the feud itself had heard its name spoken again. The documents revealed Governor Richard Koch may have personally ordered the Rangers to resolve the feud, no trials, no mercy. And when the killings got out of control, those same Rangers buried their tracks in blood. One letter hinted at something even darker, an oath signed in blood. "We are bound until the last Sutton falls." That line still haunts Texas historians today, because decades later, descendants of both families would die under bizarre circumstances: hunting accidents, house fires, and sudden heart attacks. Was the feud ever truly human, or had it become something cursed, a living force feeding on vengeance? The eerie part: some of those families still live in the same counties, and their names still show up in Texas Ranger rosters, political offices, and oil companies. History doesn't repeat itself, it just changes its face. They found the letter history buried. As the last page of the Taylor letter was read, it ended with a warning written in shaky ink. When this seal is broken, the feud begins again. But one secret was still waiting. A final envelope, unmarked, unopened, sealed with crimson wax. Inside it, historians believe, lies the truth about who really ordered the first shot of the Sutton-Taylor War. And if opened, it could expose a dynasty still ruling Texas today.